At 10,000 feet in the air, he put on the parachute, grabbed the bag full of money, opened the airplane's door, lowered the stairs, with the wind blowing so fast in his face it was hard to breathe, and jumped out into the dark, rainy night, never to be seen again. Or was he seen again? After 53 long years, we just might finally find out. Welcome to No Closure, where we shine a light on the dark reality of the 600,000 people that go missing each year, and the 90,000 that are never seen again. That's just in the US alone. People go missing for many reasons, and we delve into some truly unexplained disappearances, mysterious vanishings, and some other very controversial missing persons cases you won't want to miss. On November 24th, Thanksgiving Eve, 1971, a mysterious, quiet, and still unidentified man dressed in a dark business suit, thin black tie over a white shirt, and a black trench coat with slicked-back, jet-black, greasy hair with a patent leather sheen as described Robert B. Gregory, a fellow passenger, made his way to the flight counter at Portland International Airport and purchased a one-way ticket with cash to Seattle-Tacoma International Airport. He used the name Dan Cooper when purchasing the ticket. He then boarded Northwest Orient Airlines Flight 305, a Boeing 727 passenger plane. He walked down the aisle looking for seat 18E, found it, got seated and ordered a bourbon and 7-Up from the flight attendant, and sparked up a cigarette. This was the 70s, and put on a pair of dark shades. There were 6 crew members and 36 passengers aboard the flight, including the mysterious man. The plane took off on schedule at 2:50 Pacific Standard Time. Not too long after they were in the air, the man handed a note to the flight attendant sitting in the jump seat directly behind him. The flight attendant smirked a little, thinking to herself, another poor, lonely businessman. Assuming it was his phone number, she immediately dropped it in her purse. As she did this, the quiet man leaned towards her and whispered, "Miss, you better have a look at that note. I have a bomb." She reluctantly sat next to him and peered into the briefcase and witnessed what appeared to be 8 sticks of dynamite with wires and a timer attached. Then, while midair, the mysterious man demanded $200,000, close to $1.5 million today, and 4 parachutes be delivered to the plane when they touched down in Seattle. He said if the demands were not met, he would, quote, "do the job." Then the plane went into a holding pattern, circling the Seattle airport for an hour and a half while local and federal law enforcement hustled to get the money. Upon landing in Seattle, the 36 passengers and 2 flight attendants were released in exchange for the $1.5 million today ransom. But 4 flight crew were demanded to stay on the plane with the hijacker. Most of the passengers were not even aware the plane was hijacked upon exiting. After the loot was received, the ominously quiet man going by the alias Dan Cooper instructed the crew to refuel the plane and start on a new flight path to Mexico City, with a stop in Reno, Nevada for another refuel. Somewhere around a half hour into the second redirected flight, the man stood up and glanced around. The flight attendant who he gave the note to was the last person to admit to ever see him again, as she was directed by him to leave him alone and go lock herself in the cockpit with the rest of the crew. He put on his parachute, grabbed his money bag, opened the airplane's door, lowered the staircase, and jumped out into the night. The plane was somewhere over southwestern Washington, and that was the last time this mysterious and quiet man cloaked in dark clothing was ever seen again. Or so, that's what we're led to believe. So this crazy hijacker was never seen again. Pretty freaking outrageous. Making this whole thing even more outrageous is the fact that this hijacking a missing persons case is 52 years old, and the only commercial airline hijacking case in US history that has never been solved. So knowing this, you would think the FBI would be chomping at the bit to solve this case from the beginning, considering its 3 main components: hostage taking for ransom, jacking an airplane, and a missing/unidentified person. Huh? Well, what happened that it's now 52 years old and still unsolved, and why is it still unsolved for that matter? Well, let's look at the situations that could have happened. Oh yeah, there is actually some new information that has recently surfaced, and we'll definitely get to that. But first, let's look at the scenarios. So we ask ourselves, did he die upon landing or trying to hike out? Well, that could be the case, considering he jumped out over a heavily forested area in southwestern Washington, and on top of that, it was several hours after sunset, and he jumped right into heavy rain and snowstorm, which frequently occur around that area in November. He was also ill-prepared for that type of terrain with the suit and dress shoes he was wearing. Well, based on the findings, or lack thereof, that doesn't seem to be the case because the FBI learned about the skyjacking in midair and started the investigation immediately. They found absolutely nothing. In 1978, a hunter deep in the Washington forest found a Boeing 727 stairway placard that ended up being from Flight 305, which was that flight. Then, in 1980, 9 years after the event, a young boy found a rotting package near the Columbia River full of $20 bills, only 58,000 of the 200,000 that matched the serial numbers of the ransom money. The rest of the money was never found. The FBI maintained an active investigation and built an extensive case file, but ultimately never reached a conclusion. The original search spanned multiple states and involved thousands of people. The military was actually called in days after the jump, and close to 1,000 troops searched the jump zone on foot and in a helicopter. And last but not least, probably most important, is that the FBI continued investigating for 45 years and worked on over 1,000 suspects before finally closing the case in 2016. So, if he died, which is what the FBI says happened, would they continue to do all that they did for that many years? Also, not even a piece of bone. Bone was found but too old to be his, or shred of clothing were ever found. There's also a crazy, well, can you even call it crazy with this case, idea going around on Quora and Reddit that maybe he didn't actually jump. Even crazier, did he get sucked into Rick and Morty land through a portal? Or did he get away with it, and how? Well, let's look at some things that seem to lead to this mysterious man knowing exactly what he was doing. First off, he was offered instructions on how to use the parachute and turned them down. He chose a non-steerable parachute, which may have seemed novice, but in return that was the chute that would better withstand the exit speed of the plane, pointing yet again to he knew what he was doing. He also knew how to open the staircase before the jump. Then to top that all off, he put the parachute on with no problem. So after all these facts, it's hard to tell if he survived or perished. But debates still rage hot today on the subject. You know what the real debate is now, though? Who is this quiet, mysterious business suit-wearing man that jumped out of a plane in the dark and rain with a bag full of money? We will talk about the new information in just a second, but I wanted to let you know that if you're interested in more about this crazy disappearance case or any other mysterious missing persons cases, you can jump on over to Audible with my link in the description and check out some ebooks or physical copies there. Okay, now, back to the new information that recently surfaced, which takes us to today in February of 2024, 53 years after the original jump in November of 1971. So one thing I failed to tell you at the beginning of the story is that Cooper left that sleek black tie of his behind on the plane when he jumped. Nobody's quite sure as to why, but the FBI definitely took possession of that, and it has become the biggest source of evidence for identifying him. The new evidence that has surfaced shows that a particle that was on the tie and previously unidentified has now been identified as titanium smeared with stainless steel, which is a very odd mix of metals for that time period. The thing is, the tie was only tested for trace chemicals, certain metals and pollen, not DNA. An independent investigator named Eric Ulis, a star of history's mysteries and an expert in investigating crimes of the past, says he traced the fragments of that metal to a Pennsylvania steel company called Crucible Steel that worked with Boeing. Boeing is a plane company, and the plane DB jumped from was a Boeing. Mr. Ulis said to Fox News that if Cooper had worked at the steel company, he would have had major knowledge of the plane he hijacked, pointing back to exactly what we touched on previously about him knowing what he was doing. So who truly is the dark and elusive character called DB Cooper? After 53 years, we just might finally find out. Eric Ulis genuinely believes this evidence, and other information points back to a man named Vince Peterson, who was the titanium research engineer at Crucible Steel, who passed away in 2002. That would mean he pulled this crazy stunt off and got away. Eric goes on to say, quote, "I can put him in Seattle and I can put him at Boeing," unquote. After 13 years of investigating this case, Mr. Eulis has exclusively revealed to the U.S. Sun, a news source, that he now has obtained a sample of the mysterious man's DNA from a clip on the tie that we spoke about earlier, that he left on the plane when he jumped. Obviously, 53 years ago, we had no clue what DNA was, and seeing as Mr. Cooper seemed very intelligent, I beg to say if he did that today, he surely wouldn't have left that behind. Now, Tom Kay, the scientist who originally collected the particles from the tie, and Eric Eulis will send the DNA to a lab that conducts metagenomic DNA analysis, which is a special type of analysis that separates DNA strands to then build a genetic profile. To make that more clear for us non-scientists here, I think Mr. Eulis said it best when he said it's the holy grail of DNA analysis. It can actually separate every piece of DNA on that tie, even a dog's. So by process of elimination, they will be able to whittle it down to the elusive man called D.B. Cooper's DNA. The thing about the type of analysis is that it's expensive and time-consuming. The FBI still has the tie in their possession, and Eulis actually sued them for access because they would not release it. In my opinion, and the opinion of others, the FBI does not want to release the tie because they couldn't solve the case, and they don't want some civilian TV show host and an independent scientist solving a case they themselves could not solve in the 45 years they worked on it. They closed the case in 2016, and Mr. Eulis's case was thrown out in December of 2023 because they're trying to avoid egg on their face. He says they have enough evidence on their own to solve the case but want the tie because of the spindle on it, which would have more isolated DNA that would point almost directly to only one or two different DNA profiles as opposed to the many on the tie itself. Eulis said, quote, "People thought I was kidding when I said things are moving so fast that we could solve this by the end of the year, but I wasn't," unquote. He then laughed. So will the notorious identity of the ever-elusive plane-jacking, money-bag-grabbing, suit-wearing, parachuting man D.B. Cooper finally be revealed? He just might be this year, or maybe he'll remain cloaked in a shadow of mystery forever? Let me know what you guys think in the comments. I hope you enjoyed the wild ride of D.B. Cooper so far, and if you did, I would ask you to please put thumb to thumb for likes and subscribe to my channel No Closure for more up-and-coming mysterious missing persons cases, unexplainable disappearances, and we're going to cover some pretty wild and controversial vanishing topics. Be vigilant of your surroundings and don't leave your loved ones with no closure.